Well, thank you for sitting down with me today, Todd.
Sure.
You're the incoming chair of the NAPB. How long have you been involved with NAPB, and why is it important to you?
Well, I was at, I think, the first official meeting in 2007 at NC State. It was the Plant Breeding Coordinating Committee, which sort of NAPB was birthed out of that effort. And I became involved in NAPB directly probably about 5 years ago. I sort of cut my teeth, so to speak, through one of the committees, specifically the Communications Committee. I spent 3 years on that committee, and then I went straight into the Executive Committee as Secretary, and I've served as Vice President over this past year. But I think NAPB, it's a unique organization. There's a lot of passion in the organization. The organization is diverse. We have a diversity in terms of public institutions, government institutions, as well as private companies. And that's a real niche in terms of professional organizations. But even more than that, we have a lot of gender diversity and age diversity, which I think is great for any organization. So I think out of our current membership, probably 1/3 of the membership is students. And it's also a unique organization because it's focused on plant breeding. So it's sort of like the common ground that professionals, whether you're in the private sector or public sector, if you do plant breeding, it's sort of the common language we can come together and have fellowship, networking opportunities, and professional development opportunities.
The theme of this year's meeting is training the next generation of plant breeders. You've been at this plant breeding thing for a while now yourself. Can you trace your career for me, how you got started to where you are today?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I am a native North Carolinian. I actually grew up on an agricultural research station where my dad was superintendent in North Carolina, part of the NC State system. And growing up as a kid, I had no idea that my path would lead to agriculture as a professional. But I was an undergraduate student at NC State and got a summer job in a tobacco breeding and genetics laboratory with Dr. Earl Wernsman. And by the end of the summer, I knew that's what I wanted to do for my professional career. So fast forward, I went to University of Nebraska and worked with Steve Benzinger in small grains breeding and genetics. I got my master's and my PhD there. And after graduation, my first job out was I was a rice breeder, short grain rice breeder for the Rice Experiment Station in California. Spent 2 years there and learned a lot about plant breeding outside of my academic training experiences. And for the last 15 years, I've been with USDA, Agricultural Research Service in Florence, South Carolina. I'm a research geneticist, and I work on cotton germplasm enhancement. So that's kind of the long and twisted road to where I am today.
So why cotton? Why did you choose that?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about plant breeding. Plant breeding, your core academic training, you learn the plant breeding language. And if you have adequate training, which most of our institutions that do plant breeding provide excellent training, you can take those core skills and apply them to any plant, whether it be roses or blueberry, or we just heard about asparagus breeding. And in my case, my career thus far has encompassed experience with tobacco, small grains, wheat and barley, rice, and cotton. So it's kind of, you have the toolbox, the core toolbox, and you can apply it to whatever opportunities look interesting to you in your crop of choice. And it just so happened that cotton was the one that connected with me.
Looking back to when you were just starting out in your career, what's the one piece of advice you'd offer to young plant breeders here in Guelph, Ontario?
I think your training doesn't end after you graduate with your master's or your PhD, or your undergraduate for that matter. It's a lifelong learning experience. Today is especially true, I think, because we see so much technological innovation in plant breeding. We see, when I came through my graduate program, it was the advent of molecular markers, and now we've moved into talking about genome sequences, how we use that information. We're also seeing the introduction of engineering into the plant breeding space. So all kinds of new technologies that go into the plant breeding toolbox that I haven't been out of graduate school that long, and we weren't trained to handle these new technologies. So my advice is consider yourself not complete with your training. You learn something new every day, and you adapt to new technologies, and you figure out how to use them best for your goals in your breeding program.
As a research geneticist, how does the USDA Agricultural Research Service fit into this landscape, and how does your work fit into that specifically?
Well, I think cotton is a good example of the plant breeding enterprise in the United States. So in cotton, commercial varieties, most of those are developed and commercialized through private industry. And so you might ask, well, what is the role for a public cotton breeder in that space when 95% plus of the commercial products that you see on farms come from the private sector? And so the answer to that question, the Agricultural Research Service, we do long-term research. And so it's things that aren't going to develop a commercial product next year or 2 years or maybe even 5 years, but we're doing long-term critical things like bringing in new genetic diversity into mainstream cotton breeding, identifying specific traits that would benefit the industry, and packaging those in what we call a germplasm line. And then we work with industry. We officially release those germplasm lines and deposit them in the USDA National Collection, and they become a resource that industry, academic institutions involved in cotton breeding, or any research for that matter, can use those materials as breeding parents because of specific diversity or traits that are incorporated in those materials, and then use those to develop the new commercial products that may be out in 10 years. So we're a partnering system, and that's really, I see, where one of the vital roles of the Agricultural Research Service.
Well, those long-term programs for germplasm are very, very important.
That's right, and not to mention the fact that one of the primary roles of the Agricultural Research Service is to maintain and curate our germplasm collections, which are vitally important. You never know when a new disease is going to pop up in your crop that you don't have any resistance to, that you have to go back to the collection, the germplasm collection, and mine it for possible resistance to this new emerging disease.
In your role as incoming president of the NAPB, what are your goals for the next 12 months?
Well, you know, NAPB is a really young organization, and there's a lot of passion in our membership. And so the growth in NAPB is unbelievable. We're now sustained over 400 members, like I mentioned, 1/3 of them students. So part of my role is to keep steering the ship in the right direction. But one of the things that I want to specifically do, really two things I'll mention today. The first thing is I want to continue to build upon successful collaborations that we have with other organizations such as the American Seed Trade Association, the Tri-Societies, Crop Science Society of America, American Society of Agronomy, and Soil Science Society of America. Those collaborations in the larger agricultural space that includes plant breeding also, are really vital. We need to all work together for the same common goal to continue improving our agricultural system. The second goal, I think we have a lot of success stories that we need to share with the public. And so most of us are trained as scientists, so we can give a 15-20 minute scientific report, but I think we need to focus on all of us, and this is going to be a challenge that I throw out to our membership. I'm going to challenge people to think about plant breeding innovations that have occurred and how might, if you get a chance to talk to a civic organization, whether it be a local elementary school that you get invited to talk to a group of students, take that opportunity to tell people in layman's terms what it is you do and why it's important. I think that's vitally important to get the message out, because a lot of people, the general public, probably don't understand the impact of plant breeding in agricultural research that helps us ensure a high quality, safe, and secure food supply.
Ending on a fun note, I know you like beer. Favorite kind of beer and why?
I'm an IPA guy. I don't have a specific brand or type that I go to, but I like the IPA because it's robust, the hoppiness, and the floral sense. But you have to consume it in moderation, of course. So it's actually a great opportunity at this meeting to share an IPA with a colleague. Maybe you've met for the first time, and you may find that you continue to build your professional network by taking that opportunity to socialize.
And for people who don't know, IPA is India Pale Ale.
India Pale Ale, that's right.
Very hoppy beer.
That's right.
Very good one. Thanks so much for your time.
Yep, you bet. Thanks.